So clinical research trials are kind of this mysterious thing, but we're hearing a lot more about them now in the current setting of the pandemic. So what a clinical trial is actually the study and the science behind new medications, new treatments, new therapies, and new devices that are coming out all the time. The clinical trial is the investigational phase in the life cycle of a medication or a treatment. That's where we have a small and really tightly controlled population of patients who meet really specific criteria to take these drugs or use these devices when they're brand new. And as a research nurse, we work with the physicians, who we call principal investigators, and the patients, who we sometimes call participants, as the link between those two to make sure that they are using that therapy correctly and that they're safe in doing that, and that we collect the data that will help show if these drugs or treatments are actually effective. So that way they go from we think they're the latest and greatest to we know they are the latest and greatest. So there are some misconceptions that we are experimenting on people, or that you're some sort of Frankenstein lab science bubbling over cauldron when you're part of a clinical trial, and that is so not true. By the time we bring these studies to our patients, they've already been through preclinical phase. We aren't going to turn you green, you're not going to grow an extra limb, it's totally not like that. These medications have already been approved for study by the FDA. And I think one other thing that's important to know is that any study, before it gets to a human, has to be approved by this fancy governing body called an Institutional Review Board, or an IRB. And they look at every clinical trial that we want to do, whether it's happening nationally or around the world or not. Those members of our community and our Inspira family look at those trials and make sure that they don't look dangerous, they don't look coercive, they don't pose undue risk. The sole purpose of that IRB is to look out for the protections of human subjects or human participants, so people in clinical trials. Their sole goal is to make sure that they are going to be safe. The way that these vaccines got approved was through an emergency use authorization, and they had to go through the clinical trial process first. And so people frequently feel uncomfortable because we got these vaccines through the clinical trial process in 6 months, and some people feel like it should be 10 years before we get an answer to that. And the real difference is COVID. So one of the previous conditions that an mRNA vaccine has been trialed against were things like Zika or cytomegalovirus. So what are those, right? So probably most people have never even heard of that. We do not have hundreds of thousands of millions of people who are afraid of those diseases lining up and wanting to participate in a trial. So that's the first difference. The next thing is the number of patients who participate in a clinical trial does not change. So you need a specific number of patients to be able to test the data and find out if your drug, device, treatment, or vaccine works or not. So collectively, there were close to 75,000 patients in the phase 3 trials of the Moderna and the Pfizer COVID vaccine. It could take decades to enroll that many patients in a vaccine trial for a much less common, much less scary, much less prevalent disease. The next thing is the vaccine itself. So we're talking about a 1 or 2 dose vaccination. In the life cycle of vaccines, long term is 30 days, maybe 90 days. Our clinical trial participants were followed for twice that long. We have followed them long enough to know that the benefits clearly outweigh the risk. There are millions of people now in this country who have been vaccinated under the emergency use authorization. There have been minimal adverse events. And we're not talking about my arm is sore or I had a fever the next day. Those are not serious side effects that are concerning. And in terms of the number of people who die every minute, the thousands of people who will die today, and prior to coming to an emergency use authorization, 75,000 people demonstrated that the benefits clearly outweighed the risks of COVID. We have probably over a dozen clinical trials running right now here at Inspira. We have trials that are looking at everything from low testosterone to cervical spinal fusion surgery, and everything in between: diabetes, cholesterol, COVID, numerous cancer studies, breast cancer studies. We even have a study running that's looking at the impact of COVID-19 on cancer patients. So we have a wide array of studies here. We are creating science. We are creating the knowledge that will guide practice in the future. So you'll hear evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine used frequently. You want to make sure that your treatment is guided based on the best evidence. If we don't have clinical trials, if we don't have research, we don't have science, we don't have evidence. We have opinion or conjecture. Some of the best ideas out there, they are just ideas, they're just imaginations, they're just dreams until you do the science to prove whether they work or not.